Hi, everyone. Good to see you all again. And I hope that the materials for the first couple of sessions are really helping you to deepen your understandings around peace building, theories, and applications in contemporary cases. Um, in this session, we're going to be looking at really three different things. One is Johann Galtung, who's known, I'm sure you've come to realize, as the father of peace studies, and his very particular look at different forms of peace and also different forms of violence and how they're connected. Uh, there are lots and lots of different ways to break down these subjects, but I think over the past 50 years, Galtung's ideas really have persisted, even as they've really shifted over time. And so I'm hoping that this is moving us in a direction, as I've talked about in some of the previous sessions, of changing our view, our unit of analysis from conflict to really thinking about what are the components of peace and peacefulness, and consequently, what are the ways that we can think about it, that we can possibly measure it, and so that we can come up with effective policies and practices to help both make and build peace. Galtung's ideas are, I think, fundamental to thinking about the idea that violence is not just the violence that we see, that there are other forms of violence that people experience, and in fact, these other forms, cultural violence, structural violence, are the ones that are the precursors ordinarily to direct violence. So, it begins to answer that question of why does direct violence occur, and how do we go about sort of unwrapping the mystery of changing behaviors both at the individual level, the group level, even the state level. What can we do in order to encourage behaviors that lead to more peaceful societies? I think that that's a much more important question than the questions that have been asked for really hundreds of years about specifically about conflict and what leads to conflict, and what are the sources of it, and the forms of it, and the phases of it. Instead, we start to ask ourselves more constructively about what is it that leads to more peaceful outcomes, and what sort of behaviors and actions and attitudes can we support that will lead to those the kinds of outcomes and the kinds of societies that we'd really like to see. The second person we're really looking at in this session is Herb Kelman, who really has pioneered this approach that he calls interactive problem solving. It's been used primarily in the Israel-Palestine case, although it has been applied in some other cases since then. And it fundamentally is this idea that in conflict situations, there are ways to shift attitudes within a group. Which of course changes ultimately behaviors within a group and the relationships within a group. I hope you can see after reading Kelman's piece the strong connections between it and the idea of conflict transformation. Because fundamentally, again, we're not talking about just resolving a conflict, ending a conflict situation, but we're looking at sort of the underlying structures of these conflict situations that have led to large-scale violence, and thinking about what is it we need to do in order to help the actors in those situations think differently, behave differently, act differently, and undertake a different set of policies. The last thing we'll be looking at is a model that was established by these two American social psychologists, Thomas and Kilman. And this is, it's called, many people refer to it by different names, approaches to conflict, conflict styles. But the basic idea is that they're looking mainly at the individual level, but some of this actually is applicable to the group level too, thinking about how people approach conflict. Since we've said since the very beginning of this course that conflict is a natural, normal human phenomenon. So the real question is not how to end conflict, how to stop conflict, but how do we respond to it? How do we behave in situations of conflict, which are ubiquitous? And Thomas and Kilman, I think, start to unravel for us a little bit of this mystery and start to give us some ideas about what are some typical ways that people do respond to conflicts, and what are some ways that could be more constructive when we really think about building peace in a long-term way, and thinking about, again, the structures and how to proceed in a way that doesn't just respond to the crisis of today, but responds to an overall holistic system in which conflict is a normal, natural part, and becoming aware of what our tendencies are, and maybe whether our tendencies are effective or ineffective, and whether there are ways that we might think about reformulating the way that we approach conflict. Okay, I think that's about it for now. Again, if you have any questions, please post them to the thread, the questions thread on the discussion forum, and I'll be happy to get back to you on those. And I hope you're all having a good week. Thanks.